Welcome to The Interchange. I'm Latife Hayson. For the past 25 years, I was living in Napa Valley, California, consulting and representing buyers and sellers of wineries, vineyards, and luxury estates. My clients were the founders of publicly listed companies, tech giants, entrepreneurs, and philanthropists, all living their best lives and many changing up the world before our eyes. On The Interchange, I take a deep dive into their personal stories and many other fascinating people I have met from around the world.
If we all suddenly are in driverless electric networked cars, maybe it can all be coordinated such that we don't have as much traffic.
We talk cutting-edge technology, financial intelligence, leadership, climate change, the power of philanthropy, passion, and much more. But that's not all. As a patron of the world-renowned Festival Napa Valley, I chat with internationally renowned artists and emerging talent who grace the festival stage during the 10 best days of summer each year.
It's like being in Europe and going out to a performance every day and every night in the most beautiful settings and incredible food and wine. You really do feel like you're in Europe.
So tune in for each episode, because The Interchange is where inspiration meets innovation. Gregg Field is a multi-Grammy and Emmy-winning music industry powerhouse and one of the most versatile and highly sought-after producers, drummers, and educators in the music industry. He has toured and played drums for Ray Charles, Count Basi, Ella Fitzgerald, and Frank Sinatra, to name a few. His career is a fascinating journey through the heart of American music industry, and we are thrilled to have him here with us today. Hello, Gregg. Welcome.
Latife, it's so great to see you.
It's great to see you too. In LA, Sydney, we finally come together. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time. It's really, really an honor.
Oh, it's my honor.
Thank you. You know, what I really love about your story is that from a very young age, you knew that there were no coincidences in life and that energy flows where energy goes. And you've been very vocal about your belief that when you follow your passion, doors will open for you. So I wonder if you would indulge us with the story of how at the age of about 10 years old, you first heard jazz music, and that life-changing moment about 17 years later when you were 17. Sorry, 7 years later when you were 17. Would you mind sharing that story with us?
No, I'd be happy to. I grew up in the East Bay of San Francisco, and I started playing drums at around 9. And every year during the summer, my parents would drive my brother and I from, the Bay Area down to Disneyland in LA. And it was again, I'd been playing drums for about a year, and I was 10. And my brother and I would just run around Disneyland, and there was this big stage in the middle of the afternoon, and the curtains were closed, and there was a big crowd gathered, and my brother and I just stood there. And the curtains opened up, and it was Count Basi and his band. And I had never really heard jazz before. And I literally had a physical reaction to music for the first time. Hair stood up on the back of my neck. I got really excited, and I couldn't understand why nobody else around me was reacting the way that I was. So I asked my dad to buy every Count Basi record he could find. And for your listeners, if you don't know who Count Basi was, he would be known as a Duke Ellington type of musician, big band, 20th century icon musician, recorded with Sinatra and Ella, and was really an amazing band for many, many years. So I became obsessed with them. And I asked my dad to buy every record that Basi made, and I would come home, in elementary school and start to try to play along with the records. And eventually I memorized all the trumpet parts and all the trombone parts. I could tell you when the alto player would open up his vibrato. So this went on for 7 years. And we had a pretty strong music program in my high school. And it was December of 1973. and I was a senior, and I read that Basi and Ella Fitzgerald were going to perform at a theater just south of San Francisco for a week. And I asked my dad if I could go every night. He said, okay. And I bought a ticket for every show. And I would stand outside the stage door about an hour before the band would get there, just because I wanted to watch these guys who had become heroes to me, just come walking into the theater. Then I'd go around front, listen to the concert, and go home. So I did this Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That Saturday, they were going to do an earlier show and a later show. And my girlfriend and I, my high school girlfriend, we were going to go to the second show. And by coincidence, which I don't believe in, but seemingly it was coincidental, she called and she said, I'm not feeling well and I'm not going to go. So I thought, well, I've got nothing to do. So I went to the first concert. And like I had every other night, Latife, I stood outside the stage door. And this particular night, coincidentally, one of the guys in Count Basi's band stopped and said, do you work here? I said, no. And he said, well, what are you doing out here? I said, well, I'm grinning at him like total fanboy. And I said, well, I'm a drummer and I'm just a big fan of the band. And he said, well, I'm John C. Williams. I said, I know. You're John Calvin Williams. You joined the band in 1970. You play baritone sax and you're from Greensboro. And he was sort of surprised and stunned. He said, why don't you come back and meet some of the guys? So I go backstage and I'm in this green room and they're all my heroes, right? Freddie Green, the famous guitar player. And anyway, Basi hadn't shown up yet. He was coming by private car. And it's 5 minutes before the concert. Everybody's gathered in the wings of this theater. And I'm standing there and up comes Basi. And John said, what's your name? I said, Gregg Field. He said, Basi, this is Gregg, and he's a drummer and he's a big fan. I don't remember what Basi and I said to each other, but I remember that he was a really nice guy, like a warm energy. So the whole band goes out on stage and they're about to play. Basi's about to be introduced when his manager came up to him and said, hey, Basi, Sonny Payne's not here. Sonny Payne was the drummer. And Basi said, did you say you were a drummer? I said, yeah. And he said, do you want to play? I said, yeah. So I walk out on stage and I sit down on Sonny Payne's drums and I look to my left and there's no music. And I turned to the trombone player and I said, where's the music? He said, well, we don't pull the music out. Sonny knows it. And at that moment, I hear the voice of God say, ladies and gentlemen, Count Basi. And out comes Basi and he sat down and he started to play a tune called Splanky that I had played in the bedroom of my parents' house hundreds of times over 7 years. I got through it. I played the second song, the third song. I ended up playing the whole set. At some point, I looked over to the wings on the right side, and there was Ella Fitzgerald standing there, grinning, because somebody went and told her that some high school kid out of the audience was playing drums. So here's the most amazing thing about that whole story. I'm a 17-year-old white guy from the East Bay of San Francisco. Count Basi's band was an African-American populated band with 18 musicians. And it was the drum chair in that band was considered the most coveted job in jazz. I had no business ever getting that job, nor did I expect I would. I moved to LA and as you mentioned, I worked with Ray Charles. I toured with him for a year. Then I started working with Herbie Hancock. And I was 24 years old. And one afternoon, my phone rang. And it was Basi's manager. And he said, would you like to join the band? And I became the youngest musician that he ever hired. And within a year, I had recorded an album called A Warm Breeze that went on to win the Grammy. First album I played on that won a Grammy. I did a TV special with Frank Sinatra called The Man and His Music. And I played the Kennedy Center Honors and met for the first time my future father-in-law, Henry Mancini, who came up to me at the honors and said, wow, kid, you got the greatest job in the world. You're Count Basi's drummer. And I couldn't believe that Henry Mancini was talking to me. So sorry that's such a long answer, but it happened over 50 years ago. And what I found over all of these years, as you mentioned, where I put my time and where I put my passion, doors start opening. And it's a technique I use in creating opportunity.
Well, you know, I've got goosebumps. I mean, between you and Monica, I tell you, the stories are just amazing. Um, Truly, truly amazing. So you were working with Count Basi, and then you ultimately became Frank Sinatra's drummer, and you were on the road with him for 5 years until his last concert. So tell us about that coincidence, how that happened.
Well, you know, I spent 3 years with Basie, and I always wanted to go back to LA and work in the studios because that's a passion of mine. And I got offered a teaching position at the University of Southern California. I thought, well, that'd be a good transition. You know, I would have a job, I would have a paycheck, and I could try to work on my career. And then about a year and a half later, Ella Fitzgerald's manager called and said, you know, our drummer is under the weather. Could you come and cover a concert for him? I said, sure. So I did that for about 6 months, and then that drummer left, and I was hired by Ella. And I spent about another year with her, and then unfortunately, she had a heart attack on the road, and that sidelined her for a couple of years. I was back in LA, and you know, starting to work on music production, and then Frank Sinatra's drummer of 25 years, Irv Kotler, had quite unexpectedly died, and it was a high-profile job, and everybody wanted it. And Frank, in the space of 6 months, went through 4 drummers and 2 bass players. And I got the call. I was number 5. And I thought it was going to be a month tour of Europe, Latife. And I thought, well, I'll do the month tour of Europe. You know, I'll get fired like everybody else, but I'll put Frank Sinatra on my resume, right? It worked out. I kept the gig, and I stayed with him for the last 5 years. He toured. I recorded the Frank Sinatra duets records with him. I'm the drummer on those. And it was life-changing. I mean, you know, he paid us a lot of money. We flew first class everywhere, and we stayed where he stayed and played the most famous venues in the world. And one of my great regrets is that Frank played Australia just before I was asked to join him. And, you know, I've only played Australia once. It was in '77 with Ray Charles in Sydney at the Sydney Hilton. We played there for a week. And I've never been back. Monica's never been to Australia. And for whoever's out there listening, we want to do a concert with the Sydney Symphony, with the Melbourne Symphony. We want to come and do a proper Henry Mancini celebration. So keep that in mind.
Well, I'm going to invite you to come and stay at my new digs that I've just finished a major remodel on in the heart of Sydney. You can walk to the Opera House.
Okay.
Yes. And, you know, I've said to Rick, the co-founder of the Festival Napa Valley, and we'll talk about the festival a little bit later, but I've said to him and Marie Manetti, you know, we really should get a concert happening down at the Opera House. So maybe you and Monica need to come down and do a recce and see who we can get you hooked up with at the Opera House so we can do that. That would be really extraordinary. Really, really extraordinary. So come and be my guest, please, please.
Oh, that's very kind. I'll bring the wine.
Oh, fantastic. Speaking of Frank Sinatra, the 5 years, you know, so I read your article. You wrote an article in 2015 as a tribute to what would have been Frank Sinatra's 100th birthday. You wrote a phenomenal article for Vanity Fair, and I highly recommend it to everybody. Just go onto Google. I'd love to post it at the end, but I can't for copyright reasons. Vanity Fair, go into Google, put in Vanity Fair, Gregg Field, Gregg with a double G at the end. It is amazing. You're a great writer. I read it again last night because I hadn't read it for several months, and what a life and an extraordinary story. You have so many stories with Frank Sinatra. So
yeah, you know what? If you hang around him, you get a lot of stories. If you, in case your folks out there really want to read it, Google Sinatra drummer Vanity Fair, and that'll come up. Yeah, you know, it was William Randolph Hearst III, who happens to be a friend of mine. Who, you know, he's a famous publisher. Yeah. He loves Frank and he loves Sinatra stories. He said, "Would you write something for us for Esquire?" around his 100th birthday. And I thought, well, nobody really knew the reason Frank stopped singing. There was no farewell tour, it wasn't announced. And I remember HBO did a 4-hour documentary on Frank that never addressed the last basically 10, 20 years of his life. So I thought, well, that might be a good story to tell. So I wrote it, submitted it. The editor of Esquire turned it down. And by coincidence, again, I was at a friend's house the next day, and this young guy comes up to me and he said, "Wow, you used to work for Frank Sinatra?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Boy, I'd love to hear a story or two." I said, "Well, give me your email. I'll send you this piece I just wrote." So I sent him the story. The guy writes back and he said, "Hey, I work for Condé Nast, and I think Vanity Fair would love this." I thought, well, wait a minute. That's the kind of upgrade I'm looking for. Esquire, Vanity Fair. So sure enough, they published it. And, it was my first attempt at writing. I love doing it. I'm going to give myself a shameless plug. I've spent the last 3 years writing a book that deals with, a lot of these famous people I work with and anecdotal stories, but also a lot of how we as musicians have another way of viewing our relationships to each other that are way beyond what race we are personally. And that's a passion of mine. So it's finished, and I'm just doing the editing now, and looking forward to that coming out next year.
I knew you were writing a book. I had no idea what it was about. I was going to ask you at the end of the show, so I'm so happy to hear it. It's coming out next year. It's going to be a bestseller. It's going to be a bestseller. I just know it. But you know what? Speaking of, you are a fantastic writer, I have to say. Speaking of tributes, I think you're the king of tributes because you also did a tribute to Ella Fitzgerald on what would have been her 100th birthday at the Apollo Theatre in New York. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Oh, absolutely. My relationship with Ella went back a long way. Of course, she was discovered at the Apollo, but I produced my first television show for PBS, which was a great performances in 2007, and it would have been Ella's 90th birthday, and we had an incredible lineup. We had Quincy Jones and Natalie Cole and Monica. It was remarkable. So it was 2016, and we're about a year out before Ella's 100th birthday, and the Apollo reached out and said, "Would you be interested in producing our 100th anniversary concert?" And I'm telling you, I could count on one hand the phone calls that I've received that thrilled me more than I could imagine. And we did it. We had Count Basi's band, a lot of amazing artists, Patty Austin. We had the strings along with Basi's band. Anyway, we recorded it for a record that came out on Concord. And I was really, really pleased with that. It's, if you think about the great stages of the world, I think of the Hollywood Bowl. I think of Carnegie Hall, certainly Royal Albert Hall, and the Apollo Theater. And there's something about those stages that when you walk out, you realize the ghosts of the greats attend every performance, and so not only is it a thrill for us as artists to walk on that stage, but it also, energizes our performance. I did Royal Albert Hall for 2 weeks with Sinatra, and in the 5 years I was with him, those were the best concerts that we ever did, and it was because the audience, just the roar of that audience hitting you as a performer energizes you. And there are very few stages that can claim that. But, to be on the stage where 10 feet in front of me, Ella Fitzgerald walked out not to sing. It was the amateur contest. She came to dance. And another coincidence, that night that she came on to dance in the amateur contest, there were two women called the Edwards sisters that were from Harlem. They were in their 20s. They'd gone to Hollywood, and they performed in some film, and they came back as the cause célèbre of Hollywood at their home theater in Harlem. And they decided to have that one professional act come out and perform and then start the amateur contest. And sure enough, Ella was up, and Ella walked out and said, I can't follow them. And the host said, well, I'm sorry. And she said, can I sing something? And he agreed. And she started to sing a song called Judy, that was made famous by the Boswell sisters. And there was a guy in the audience named Benny Carter who worked for a very famous band leader, drummer. I'm not remembering his name, unbelievably. Anyway, in 3 days, Ella had been hired, and the rest is history. Yeah,
What
an
an
amazing story.
what an
Yeah.
extraordinary story, amazing story. Greg,
I mean, can you imagine, not to interrupt, but you imagine for us, there's Count Basi's band, there's the mic, there's the place where Ella stood, all those years before, 60 years before, and the curtains are closed, and we're about to open curtains up. And I tell you, I get choked up talking about it now. It was very emotional for all of us.
yeah, it just gives me goosebumps. You know what's really, am I going to say sad, but disappointing? I don't know what it is. But at our age, all these greats, I mean, most of them are gone, right? All these famous
Man.
people that wonderfully talented. We've lost so many of them. It's like you just want to bottle them, right? You just want to bottle them. Incredible.
Thank God we have the recordings now,
Yeah.
and with the technology, we can take recordings that they can become much more lifelike and real than they would, say, 20 years ago. So, I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, and you know what? I did find an interview with Henry Mancini. Whoa. You know what? You know when I think it was? I think it was the day that he took his twin daughters, Monica and Felice, to see Elvis Presley. And I watched that. And so it's so interesting. So this person's no longer here, but it must be so hard as a family member, to watch somebody who's no longer here, and there they are speaking and you just, the memories.
It's funny you say that. I lost two friends, both very famous, in the last year and a half. One you'll certainly know, Quincy Jones, and a very famous American television producer named Norman Lear, who lived to the ripe age of 101 and a half. And of course, Quincy made it to 91. Latife, I'm not having the horrible grief that I would have expected to have with the loss of people that meant so much to me. And I've been asking myself, why is this not painful? And I think because so much of them lives in me, in all of us that knew their music or knew them, that they're not really gone. Sure, I can't pick up the phone and call Norman and say, hey, let's have dinner Monday night. But I think about him 10 times a day. It's something I might say or something I remember that he said. So it's like their life has become so much a part of me that they're still here, very much still here. And I'm kind of enjoying that. Maybe it's just because I'm a little bit older now. And but they're deeply rooted, right? And so I'm not so much missing them as I am celebrating them. And I understand that now for the first time. Celebrating someone.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was going to bring up Quincy Jones because, it's the circle of life, isn't it?
Oh,
I just learned that, Quincy Jones had just died this month, actually, the 3rd of November, at the age of 91. But, and I don't want to bring this up yet because we're going to talk about it, but he actually was involved in your album, the tribute album to Henry Mancini, and we will talk about that in a minute. But first,
okay.
I wanted to get to your, well, firstly, you have said many times, I've heard you say many times, that you like to reinvent yourself. So you, after being on tour, you became an engineer, musical engineer, and a producer. And you have won Grammys and an Emmy for both. So you've got 8 Grammys and 1 Emmy. Can you tell us about those roles and those Emmys, those Grammys, please?
Well, it's that coincidence rearing its head again. So, you know, I didn't know Frank was going to stop. And honestly, I got pretty comfy. I was making a lot of money, playing the best venues. And then, it was early 1995, and we would always take Christmas off. And normally in the first week of January, we would get an itinerary that had the concerts basically for the next quarter. And a week went by, 2 weeks went by, 3 weeks went by, and I finally had come to realize that my Sinatra days were over. So about 6 months went by, and I was standing at the bar at the Polo Lounge at the Beverly Hills Hotel. And coincidentally, this guy comes up to me and he said, "Aren't you Frank Sinatra's drummer?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "And you work for Count Basi, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, my name's Hal." And he said, "I'm your biggest fan." I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Well, I own all the Frank Sinatra videos that have been made from 1960 until now." And he says, "I see you all the time, but I've never met you." So we talked for 20 minutes. He went on his way. And about 4 or 5 months later, I get a phone call from his wife, Carol Gabe. And she said, "Hi, Greg. You met my husband, Hal." I have no idea who she's talking about. And she said, "He's going to have his 50th birthday. And we would like to hire Diane Shure, the jazz singer, and your big band to do a surprise concert for him." And I said, "Great." So, we get to the Bel Air Hotel, which is where they had this party, and we were all set up, ready to go, and guests start arriving before Hal did. And it's Sherry Lansing, the president of Paramount. It's Norman Lear. It's some serious Hollywood heavyweights. I thought, geez, who is this guy? And then sure enough, he comes walking in, and it's the guy I met at the bar. Okay, so I'll make this answer to your question, but that's the foundation of it. We became very close friends very quickly. And within a year or two, we bought Concord Records, which was a small jazz label from Concord, California, started by a guy who was a Lincoln Mercury car dealer in Concord that loved jazz, that I met when I was 16 years old, a guy named Carl Jefferson. And he built this jazz label with Mel Torme, and he had all these great, basically older artists. So we bought the label in 1998. We moved it to LA, and I started learning the music business, but I started working more and more as a producer. And the studio that we're in right now was the Concord Records studio. It's now my personal studio. But we made a lot of records in here. I don't know if you can see that. That's Genius Loves Company. That picture of Ray Charles back there, that's the album that won every Grammy it was up for. It was Ray's last record. A lot of that was done here. But I would always be down here and kind of tweaking, my mixes. And I was making my first record with Arturo Sandoval, this famous jazz trumpet player. And it was this beautiful, delicate record with Shelley Berg's trio and strings playing classical crossover music, sort of morphed into jazz. And we had strings on 10 of the 12 songs. And Arturo Sandoval said to me, "Oh, man, come on. We got to have strings on the other two songs." I said, "Arturo, we don't have any more budget." And the executive in charge of the whole project said, "Hey, Greg, why don't you just mix the record yourself, and that'll free up the money for the strings?" And I said, "You mean me mix the record myself from scratch?" He said, "Yeah, you can do it. Don't worry about it. You'll figure it out." I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. So it took me a little time, but I mixed the record, and I got a Grammy nomination for Best Engineer, Latin Grammy nomination. And you know what, Latife? It really pissed off my friends that are engineers. Like, "Hey, we don't try to play drums. Why are you trying to?" I said, "Man, I ran out of money. I had to do it." And it gave me confidence. And that was 2009. I've mixed every record I've done since then. And I actually won the Latin Grammy for Best Engineer 2 or 3 years later. So that's
When a
how
door
that started.
opens, when a door opens, walk through it, right?
Yeah. And I mean,
Amazing.
the worst thing that could have happened is that, the mixes sucked, and I just would call a friend and say, "Come over and fix them for me." But it all worked out.
Amazing. Okay, tell us about your other Grammys.
Well, they're pretty diverse. I produced a tango record, which won the Best Tango Album of the Year for the Latin Grammys. I won Producer of the Year for the Latin Grammys. Um, I won, or received, I should say, um, Best Engineer. Then I produced a friend of mine who's a really famous bluegrass fiddle player named Mark O'Connor called me and asked me if I'd be willing to produce his record. And we had Allison Krauss on our label, and I liked bluegrass, but I didn't really understand the genre that much. So I did a deep dive into it, flew down to Nashville and tracked it, and then finished the record here. And it won the Grammy for Bluegrass Album of the Year. I received another one for an album I did for Arturo Sandoval called Dear Diz, Every Day I Think of You, which was a tribute to his mentor and teacher, Dizzy Gillespie. And then I won another one for a very contemporary American big band called the Big Fat Band with Gordon Goodwin.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Well, you and I both know that your real life purpose and your greatest achievement is being married to the brilliant and beautiful Monica Mancini.
Oh, baby.
Is there a coincidence? Is there a coincidence there? I know you met her father long before you met her, right?
Yeah, and I met her father at the Kennedy Center Honors. I was 25, and I'm not joking. He used to literally say to Felice and Monica, "No trumpet players and no drummers," right? And that's pretty good advice, knowing what I know. And so I met him one time a few years later, but again, he passed away in 1994, little over 30 years ago, at 70, sadly of pancreatic cancer. But what that caused to happen is Monica had a really cushy, career in the studios. She recorded with Michael Jackson on the History record. She did. She was a big deal in the studios, but she had no interest in going out and becoming a performer. And then again, Henry had a lot of live concerts booked with symphonies all over the world. And Bill Conti, the film composer, as Monica mentioned earlier, invited her to come out and stand in front of an orchestra in front of a live audience and sing. Not in the background, but it's not 20 feet from stardom. It's coming out and basically it's your show at that point. So there was a month tour of Japan in 1997. I was hired to be a month tour of the Henry Mancini Orchestra touring Japan. I was asked to be the drummer on the tour, and I had heard that Henry's daughter Monica was going to be the singer. And I thought, this has got to be Nepo baby time, right? Because I didn't know, we don't usually work with background singers. We do our part as the rhythm section and singers come in later. So I really didn't know anything about her. And she came out and she sang. The first thing we rehearsed was at Suntory Hall in Tokyo, which is their Disney Carnegie Hall. And Monica sang The Days of Wine and Roses. And I was stunned at what an absolutely amazing singer she was. And then she was really beautiful, right?
To boot.
I'd never been married. I'm single. I'm a happy guy. But I had done 25 tours of Japan. I'd lived over a year and a half of my life. I'd been in Japan. I've been in over 50 cities. And my Japanese was pretty good. So it was the third day of the tour, and the Japanese promoter came up to Monica and said, "Would you be willing just to take this little cheat sheet, and would you read these 2 paragraphs in Japanese to our audience? It would mean so much." So she agreed to do it, and we had this 3-hour train ride from Tokyo across Japan, not up or down, but across Japan. And I said, I could help you with the pronunciation. So Latife, we sat on that train for 3 hours laughing our heads off. And I got off the train and I thought, I am really in trouble. I was in love with her. It was over. And by the end of that tour, um, we've never been apart.
You
And
know,
uh,
it's
that
such a
was
great
27
story.
years ago.
It's such a
Yeah,
great story. And you know, over the years that I've known you, I mean, I love how much you guys love each other. And I've heard Monica say, "Oh, it's just so easy being married to Greg. It's just so easy and so wonderful." And I know you feel the
sure.
same way. So watching the two of you together it's precious. It's totally precious. So I'm
I'll
thrilled.
speak for me. I'm incredibly grateful. I am the poster child for marrying up. I mean, and not just because of Henry or because of Monica, but because of my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law, but in particular my mother-in-law.
Oh,
I love my mother-in-law so much. We had an incredible relationship away from the girls, away from her son, as two musicians. And she was not only an incredible musician, one of the most amazing human beings that taught me a lot about how to uh, how to treat other people, certainly, um, and just the civility and the class and the gravitas this woman possessed. It was incredible, and the fact that at 5 o'clock every night for probably 70 years she had a Bombay Sapphire and a wine glass with ice, maybe two, and I just I substitute the gin for bourbon, and we're two birds of a feather.
oh, look, she seemed like such a wonderful woman, everything I read about her. And she was very beautiful, too. Very
Oh
beautiful.
yeah,
Let's talk about my passion, which is Festival Napa Valley.
oh
So,
yeah.
what's your involvement with the festival?
Okay, well you mentioned Charles Letourneau and Rick Walker. I met them about 17 years ago. And Festival Napa was a 10-day festival, still is, as you know, that takes place at the different wineries. And it was initially all classical music content. They would bring over the Moscow Symphony, and it attracted the biggest names in classical music: Joshua Bell, Renee Fleming, Itzhak Perlman, Pinka Zukerman. And it was sponsored, by um, Bentley, all the finest wineries presented these events, and it was great. They decided that they wanted to bring in a popular element. In other words, maybe some jazz artists, um, artists outside of the classical world, and they brought me in to do that, and started working with them, and it's been a really great relationship. And then about 5 years ago, I'm on the board of the University of Miami Frost School, and that's where the Henry Mancini Institute is. And we were thinking it might be time to move on from the Moscow Symphony because it was very expensive to bring them over. So we found sponsors in Florida, and each year now, probably the last 4 or 5 years, we bring a coterie of 30 or 40 musicians from the University of Miami that populate most of the orchestra that do most of the concerts at the festival. And it's more popular now, it's more successful now than it's ever been. We had Lionel Richie as our gala performer this year, and he knocked it out of the park. And it's great. It's just, for your wine fans and music fans, it happens every July, and just highly recommend you come and join us in the Napa Valley.
Well, listen, it is absolutely phenomenal. And you know, Shelley Berg, how did you meet Shelley Berg, the great Shelley Berg? How did you meet him?
I was teaching at USC. It was 1993, 92, 93. I was still traveling with Frank. And we hired the head of, Shelley came in as the new head of the jazz department. And I can tell you from when I started teaching at SC in 84, the jazz department was the redheaded stepchild of the music school. We were about opera and we were about classical music. And Shelley came in short order, turned our jazz program around where we became the darlings of the music school, the Thornton Music School. Um, After teaching there for about 18 years, I decided to step away because I was touring that whole time. And honestly, I got tired of teaching. But Shelley was there, and um, I left in 99. In 2005, 95, I was asked to join the board of the School of Music. I did. Um, and then 96. And then Shelley got an offer to become the dean of the jazz department of the music school at the Frost School of Music, University of Miami, which was already a really great music school. It didn't compare with the USC Music School, but it was a great school. Well, Shelley accepted the job, and over those years that he was at USC, and subsequently, he and his wife Julia and Monica and I became very, very close friends, and we would tour the world together as tourists and friends,
Wow.
and spent every holiday together. Um, and this has gone on now for over 30 years. When he left USC to go to the Frost School, it broke our hearts. I had to announce it at our board meeting, and it's the first time I understood the expression the air was sucked out of the room, because people really went, oh, no, this isn't happening. Um, and what he did for our jazz department at USC, he's done for the music school at the University of Miami. And they are certainly on par with USC as one of the strongest music schools in the world. Um, and I don't know how he does it, but he also works as a professional musician. He just got a Grammy nomination for a composition for his new record. So, he's one of these golden childs that is blessed to be incredibly talented, and we're lucky to have him at Festival Napa.
We certainly are. He gave me a copy of his album when I was when we were all together in July. Um, I sat next to him. I think I sat next to him and Julia, or at some stage during Tina and Jeffrey's wedding. But I just remember that night, um, Jeffrey Miller was not involved in the festival. And I knew that the festival wanted to get him involved. So we spent a lot of time at the wedding talking, Shelley and I, about how we're going to get Jeffrey involved. And, they're so philanthropic with so many things that, but now, of course, they're major sponsors. I mean, they've really been involved, very much involved in bringing the Frost School of Music and the faculty who play with the students to the festival, and it is absolutely phenomenal. And we're very blessed to go to their events, their special event every year.
I know it makes it all the more special, and they're incredible musicians.
Yeah. So you are on the board of the Frost School of Music, and that is where the Henry Mancini Institute Orchestra is. So how did that come to be, and tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, Shelley and I would still see each other 5 or 6 times a year, even though I was living in Miami. And I was actually, I became the chairman of the music school at USC. I've been the chairman now 10 years. It's incredible. It's gone by really fast. And Shelley said, "Do you think there would be a conflict of interest if you joined my board?" And stayed on at USC. And our dean at USC said, "Nope, I want you to do it. Absolutely." He said, "We're all in this boat. We're trying to help young musicians. Let's collaborate." So I joined his board about 8 years ago, I guess. And it's a very different environment, between the two schools. But I'm honored to be on his board and able to help a little bit.
The Frost School of Music is really quite extraordinary. And by the way, those 85 graduate students, it's tuition free, right?
You mean for Festival Napa or
No. Well, no, at the Frost School of Music, the graduates that go there, the graduates
I don't know if they all have scholarships for graduate. I wouldn't be surprised, but that's one of the big challenges we have at all the universities and conservatories. Is what kills us, and not to get too deep in these weeds, I think your audience will find this interesting, is that to have an orchestra at a university, at Juilliard or Eastman or USC or any of the schools, you need 40 string players. And basically, if you're a string player from anywhere in the world, from China, from Singapore, from anywhere, you can pretty much get a free ride. And that is a huge expense for university music schools to absorb. So we're trying to change that at USC, but I know that there's a very robust support system at Frost School of Music. So I wouldn't be surprised if you're a grad student if you have your your costs covered.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful school. Um, let's talk about Henry Mancini, the late great Henry Mancini, and all the wonderful celebrations that you and Monica and the family have put together this year. But you produced the album Henry Mancini 100 Sessions. Henry has company. So tell us about the background of putting that album together, which is just superb.
It took 2 years or a year and a half. Um, we decided to make this record. We knew we wanted to do Peter Gunn. We knew we wanted to do Pink Panther, obviously Moon River, Days of Wine and Roses. Um, and the first song we thought, well, let's start with Peter Gunn. So Monica picked up the phone. She's known John Williams since she was 5 or 6 years old, and John was in his 20s. Um, and I think Monica probably talked about this, but John Williams was Johnny Williams, and in 1957 he was Henry Mancini's session pianist. So when you hear da 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 da, that's John Williams, Star Wars John Williams. So Monica picked up the phone and said, "Hey John, you want to play piano on tribute album to Henry?" And he said, "Whatever you want, my angel." And I had worked with Quincy a lot. I picked up the phone and called him and said, "Hey, do you want to conduct this?" Um, the Joneses and the Mancinis go back to around 64. Um, Quincy was a huge star. He'd produced hit records with Sinatra, and he had his own records out, but he wanted to break into film scoring. And he was up for a film called The Pawnbroker with Rod Steiger. And the head of one of the studios called Henry Mancini and said, "Hey, do you think this guy Quincy Jones is up for that?" Well, it was a double-edged sword question. The real question he was asking: this guy's black and he's a jazz musician. Do you think he can do it? And Henry said, "Are you kidding? Quincy Jones." So Quincy never forgot that. And at that point, Quincy and his oldest daughter, Jolie, and Monica were about the same age. The families got really close. So when I called him to conduct, it was, yeah, of course. And then I'd worked with Herbie Hancock over 40 years and called Herbie and said, "You want to be the other piano player?" And he said, "Sure." And then I called Arturo Sandoval and said, "You want to be in the band? Blow a little bit?" He said, "I'm in." So this was October of 2022. We were just coming out of COVID. But we were on the Warner Brothers scoring stage, the Eastwood stage, with about 20 musicians. And Latife, when John Williams and Quincy Jones and Herbie Hancock were standing together, it was historic. It was unprecedented. And they had known each other for decades and decades, but have probably never been standing there together about to record something together. I'll tell you, when Quincy was the first to get to the studio, and he went up on the conductor's podium, and John came in next, and John came up to Monica and I, and he looked at Quincy and he said, "First time I laid eyes on Quincy Jones, he was the prettiest thing I'd ever seen." And he said, and he still is.
Oh,
And
bless
so,
him.
bless him. And sadly, and what you'll see on the documentary that we're doing and on the PBS special, this was Quincy Jones's last time in a studio, so it's historic. So we got very lucky, and CBS News has a show called CBS Sunday Morning. So if any of your viewers want to see, they did a segment covering that session because it was so historic. So if you Google CBS Sunday Morning Mancini, you'll see one of 3 segments, it's quite unprecedented, that they did on the making of this record. Second song we wanted to do was Pink Panther. But what do you do with it other than have it played by a saxophone player? So we thought about Dave Koz, who's an old friend. But then by coincidence, I knew that Lizzo was a flute player. And I don't usually look at TikTok, but something popped up on TikTok, and it was Lizzo reading a Christmas card that she'd received from the greatest flute player in the world, Sir James Galway, who had done concerts with Henry Mancini over decades. He lives in Switzerland. And I said, hey, Monica, why don't we do a flute duet with Lizzo and Galway? And so she calls Galway in Switzerland, and Galway said, yeah, I'll do it. And I
Fantastic.
said, well, I don't know her. Will you call her? And he said, yeah. So she said, I'll tell you what, I'll do it for free if you will play the Met Gala with me in New York City. And he said, sure. So we all went to New York. We put together the absolute cream of the crop big band in New York. And Lizzo and Galway come in and they play the Pink Panther as a flute duet with the full big band, and strings that we recorded later at Abbey Road. And the next night, the two of them are on these thrones at the Met Gala playing Flight of the Bumblebee. So that put Pink Panther to bed. And then Henry wrote Moon River for, as you know, for Audrey Hepburn to sit on the stoop and play guitar at Breakfast at Tiffany's. And it's just Audrey, guitar, and strings. But the opening of Breakfast at Tiffany's, you hear Moon River for the first time, not with the lyric, it's played by harmonica. So I had a crazy idea, and I thought, what if we were to get the most famous conductor in the world, Gustavo Dudamel, who's the current conductor of the LA Philharmonic, Audrey Hepburn singing, Stevie Wonder to play the harmonica part. What if we could put all that together? So I reached out to Dudamel through the LA Phil, and it took a year and a half. It was the last thing we ended up recording, but we got permission to use Audrey's voice, just her voice, nothing else. And we re-recorded Henry's arrangement of Audrey sitting on the stoop, right? And then it morphs into the opening scene of Breakfast at Tiffany's. And instead of a studio player playing harmonica, this time it's Stevie Wonder.
Oh.
And the guitar that you hear played under Audrey, we found the actual instrument that was used for the session in 1961, and our famous session player, Dean Parks, played it. And if you go online and you Google Gustavo Dudamel, Moon River, Audrey's Letter, there's a nice surprise in there, and you can watch Stevie and the orchestra and Gustavo Dudamel, LA Phil, the LA Master Chorale, with this recording. That was the first of two Moon Rivers. The other Moon River that we did, I've never heard I've heard a million arrangements of Moon River. In the last 3 years, Frank Ocean's recorded it, Beyonce's recorded it, Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck and and Morrissey. They've all recorded Moon River. Some of them are fantastic, but they never reached that level of emotional intimacy, I suppose, that Henry did when he wrote the arrangement. Well, we were going to do this version with Bublé, and I thought, I could have an arrangement written and say to the arranger, try to make it sound like Henry would write. But I realized that Henry wrote an arrangement of Moon River for himself to do live in concert where he plays the melody. And I thought, wait a minute, why don't we use that arrangement? It's in D. Michael Bublé needed it in B. So we could easily drop it a step and a half. And I would have an arrangement for Michael that Henry wrote. Wow. So we had it adapted. We went to the Beatles studio, Abbey Road 2, and we recorded the Royal Philharmonic, did the rhythm section here in LA, did all the orchestra there, and then we flew to Vancouver where Michael lives to do his vocals. And you can see that on CBS Sunday morning, including the Lizzo Galway Pink Panther session. And then there's a very famous guitarist named Pat Metheny, who I'd never met. This guy's won 20 Grammy Awards. If you're not familiar with him, he's the only artist to ever win 20 Grammys in 10 categories or any Grammys in 10 categories. Turns out he was a huge Henry Mancini fan. And we share a mutual friend, and I spoke with him, and he said Henry Mancini was his first big influence. He would love to play on the record. So he plays on a song called Slow Hot Wind Lujan. And then the last song we were going to do is Days of Wine and Roses, which Henry had received his third Oscar for. And we did it with Take Six. The original had a choir, so we used Take Six with French horn, and Monica sang it for the record, and that's how we made the record. It came out June 21st, and I'm very proud and was shocked to say that a week later, it hit #1 on Apple Music.
Oh.
Not Apple Jazz, not Apple Adult Contemporary. We actually outsold Taylor Swift.
Oh, I love it. That is awesome.
And it's all because of the CBS Sunday coverage. It's completely because of that. So we're very proud of the record. We just got a Grammy nomination for it.
Oh.
And so that's the story with the record.
Well, well deserved, I have to say. I've listened to it so many times. And Michael Bublé, as I said to Monica, I was very lucky to get the footage to see you both walk into the studio in LA to record that with you on drums and his rendition. Oh, it was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. I saw a podcast. It was an interview of him, a long-form interview with him just recently. He had a really hard time getting a break, which is amazing because his voice was extraordinary from such a young age. But what a story. Did you ever see that interview? I'm sure you know the story. But
I didn't see the interview. He's told me the story. We're pretty good friends. I've played drums on 3 of his records, and I've produced him a few times. No, he had this guy was not going to be stopped.
No.
And for me, for male singers that sing the Great American Songbook, it goes Frank Sinatra, Bobby Darin, Harry Connick, Michael Bublé. I mean, those guys took that music and made it their own.
Yeah, I bring him up because, as you say, he was not going to sit back and not let this happen. He followed his passion. Boy, did he follow his passion! Incredible. And I did see him on some concerts with who's the famous music producer? David Foster.
David Foster.
David Foster. Yeah. He had a hard time convincing him as well, but he did. Like you, he followed his passion. Sticking with Henry Mancini and celebrations, how was your concert at the Library of Congress?
Well, it's the Library of Congress, isn't it? So, everybody, maybe they fix their tie a little bit more going in that place. It was great. We had the same musicians that you heard at Festival Napa from, the Mancini Institute. We had a great angel that sponsored them coming up. And that actually is going to be, that entire concert is going to be available online at libraryofcongress.com. I think starting around December 1st. And Monica sings quite a bit of it. And then, the other really big celebration for us is in the United States, we have something called PBS Great Performances, which is, it comes out of New York City. And it's the crown jewel of the PBS year is their December presentation of great performances. And this year, it's Henry Mancini live from the Hollywood Bowl with a lot of other parts of it. And we're pretty proud of that. It won't air, it'll only air in the United States and Canada, but it will be up for streaming. And hopefully, maybe we'll find a network in Australia that might want to run it.
I was going to say, seriously, Greg, you, Monica, and I should get together with Shelley and with Rick and Charles and try and pull this off in Sydney. It would be absolutely phenomenal. I'm on the ground down here. I can help you with anything.
Please.
Truly, it would be my absolute pleasure. We really would. It would be absolutely phenomenal to have a Henry Mancini concert here. Really, really would love it.
And one other thing, and Monica has not been. to Australia. And I so wanted to feel the love and warmth that we get as musicians coming there. I mean, we love
Wow.
it.
Come on down, come on down. Listen, honestly, I'm within walking distance of everything. I don't even have a car. Can you imagine after living 25 years in Napa Valley, having a car to go everywhere? I literally walk, or you do ferry. The ferries are amazing. We get around by ferry. Went to the hairdressers by ferry, you know. I mean, and all the restaurants and cafes, but the opera house would be just amazing. It's only a 45-minute walk. I mean, it's a daily walk, you know, nothing.
I love it.
So yeah, come stay, please.
Count.
Looking back on your life, what would you attribute all the happiness, achievements, and success to?
Oh, geez. Well, it was a hard path. You know, I mean, we talk about all the wins and I've been really blessed. I mean, really, really blessed. But you know, if I go to an airport in the United States and I'm at American Airlines waiting to get on an airplane, and I look at all the cities in the United States, you know, maybe there's 100 on that board. I've been to every one of them a lot. And when I first went on the road, I did 50 cities in 50 nights and averaged 400 miles a day by bus. And, you know, getting started, it's really rough. It's a lot of work, a lot of joy, but man, it was a lot of work. So I'm at a point now where I'm so blessed to get to do what I do. And when I look back, honestly, sometimes it's hard to believe that I actually did that because it's just so different. I was
Yeah.
a jazz drummer in you know, I was working with Ella in my 20s. And now I produce Placido Domingo. I do opera. I produce television shows. You know, I can announce something huge.
Oh, I love
So,
it.
do you know the Korean band BTS?
Have
BTS is the most successful boy band in the world.
Is that right? Oh, no.
Oh,
Are
yeah,
they
yeah.
playing? Have they played with David Foster?
No. Well, they
No.
might have, but they're not. They're that he doesn't produce them. But um, I made this record finished it about 6 months ago, and it comes out on December 6th. But one of the members of BTS and Bing Crosby's original White Christmas vocal, we've created as a duet. And I can tell you now, we announced it on November 6th. And in 3 hours on the BTS website, in 3 hours, it had 344,000 likes. I've never had a reaction to a record. Any of your audience under 30 will know who BTS is. I mean, they're huge worldwide.
Okay.
So, but you know, so I produced this record, but you know, that's not the guy that was playing drums with Frank Sinatra. So it's, you know, my life keeps every 10 years becoming something else.
Yes, I remember that. Now, BTS, do I just put BTS into Spotify and I'll,
Oh, right. Yeah. Right now, if you just put in BTS, and this singer calls himself V, that's his name. So if you put in BTS, V, and Bing Crosby, oh, you'll see it.
Oh, okay. I can't wait. I can't wait.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? It's been a phenomenal life. And being with you today and Monica you've made my day. So thank you so much. I know it took a long time for us to pull this together, but I'm immensely grateful and very honored to have had both of you on. So thank you very, very much for coming.
Our pleasure. Have a wonderful holiday. I can't wait to see you back in Napa, and hopefully we'll be seeing you down under.
Definitely. So I'll see you in July, if not before Down Under.
Okay.
Thank you so
You're
much.
on.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you next time.